is in Mira Mesa. And this is an unbelievable plan. Maybe you've seen the news. This has been out on the news for a few weeks now. Mira Mesa, one of the more dense locations in San Diego, one of the more highly populated areas of San Diego, has now created a new plan to double the housing in Mira Mesa. Like, you're thinking, wow. I mean, Mira Mesa already has a tremendous amount of people, a tremendous amount of homes. And if you've driven through Mira Mesa, oh my gosh, a tremendous amount of traffic. And now they want to double the housing. I mean, this is a pretty bold move here. So right now, Mira Mesa has just over 26,000 homes. They want to expand that to 58,000 homes. And that's sort of the maximum. It'll kind of depend how this thing rolls out, but this is kind of part of a future plan for zip code 92126. The population now is 78,000. They want to almost double it to 143,000 people in Mira Mesa. I mean, wow. So all of this is kind of part of a plan to kind of transform the community from a car-dependent neighborhood. And gosh, it's car dependent. You ever been out there on Mira Mesa Boulevard and Camino Ruiz, or Mira Mesa Boulevard and Black Mountain Road? I mean, that's a traffic cluster out there. I remember having to drive from Poway all the way out to Sorrento Mesa for one of my old jobs about 20 years ago. And that was a grind. And that road was really congested. It always bottlenecked. It was difficult. But Mira Mesa has always been this sort of city of strip malls, right? Well, they're talking about radically transforming this into multiple urban villages that would be scattered about in the Mira Mesa area and maybe even parts of Miramar. To me, this is just really interesting because this is all part of the radical changes in housing that are going on throughout San Diego County. I've talked a lot about this extensively here in Poway. We've had all the Poway political candidates that came in here, and we had the long form conversations. And the construction of new housing in Poway is a major issue. And there's major construction going on in Rancho Penasquitos at the Merge 56 project. There is housing projects that are going up in Imperial Beach, in La Mesa, in Oceanside, which you're about to comment on in just a moment. There's been a lot of housing that's been developed in Escondido. I mean, this is all part of a radical change that's going on, not just in San Diego County, but really all across America, and particularly in California. There's a serious housing crisis in California. City leaders are beginning to address it, and it's ruffling a lot of feathers. People that don't like change. Now, the vision for Mira Mesa that they have planned, this sort of 20-year outlook, is that they want roughly 50% of the transportation to be by walking, by biking, or by mass transit. So this is all part of a climate change plan that a lot of cities have implemented around San Diego County. My hometown of Poway is one of the cities that hasn't done that. But Mira Mesa, in their future view of how they're planning their community, they're considering these things to try to get more walking, more biking, more mass transit. And I think as San Diego becomes to be more of an urban city rather than a suburban sprawl city, that's going to be a necessary component of this. I mean, if you look around America, a lot of cities that are very urban or have a lot more density, have a lot more walkable communities, and have a lot more public transportation. So you can see kind of where this is going. Now, when you think of Mira Mesa, it's not just the residential sort of strip mall area of 92126. It also encompasses Sereno Valley and Sereno Mesa and even parts of Miramar Road. And so on the western end of Mira Mesa Boulevard is, really where a lot of major corporations, I think isn't Qualcomm headquartered out there. They're going to still have what they call these innovation districts, but they're going to actually rezone some of that to integrate more housing over there as well. So this to me is very, very intriguing. And guess what? They even are entertaining the idea of a skyway, essentially one of those how do I call it? It's like the ski lift, the gondola that goes from one part of Mira Mesa to another, kind of like what we see in the zoo and in SeaWorld and in Disneyland. Those kinds of things are being proposed as potential ideas for Mira Mesa. That's pretty crazy. I mean, it's pretty interesting. Kind of some innovative things to, bring the whole community to life. But ultimately, they want to break up this notion of car centric, they call it super blocks. And last night, I was online, and one of the guys that I like to follow on Twitter goes by the handle the Poway, was it Poway Urbanist, I think. And I don't even know who this gentleman's name is. He lives in my hometown of Poway, but he's like really focused on city planning, urban planning, and making cities workable. And he shared a video about this idea of what he called stroads. And that sounds like a weird name. It's like a merger of the word street and the word road. And this idea of stroads are this category of making roads like what we see in Mira Mesa, like what we're seeing in parts of Poway, like we really are seeing all throughout America. Because roads are intended to be major thoroughfares with minimal cross traffic, almost like tiny highways that really get you from one location to another relatively quickly at relatively high speeds. And then there might be roundabouts every so many miles to provide options to exit. But meanwhile, there are streets, and streets are meant to be city streets that are in more dense areas that have a lot of driveways and side streets, and people drive a lot more slowly. But in America, in San Diego, and especially in Mira Mesa, they have blended the two. Mira Mesa Boulevard, for some people, like when I used to work in Serrano Mesa, was a road. It was a boulevard, but I thought of it as a road. It was a way for me to get from one place to another and kind of blow through Mira Mesa, the residential and strip mall part of Mira Mesa, to get over to where all the technology companies were. But at the same time, there are people, pulling into parking lots to go to supermarkets, to go to restaurants, to do whatever they're doing during their normal day. And so you've got this major thoroughfare with a lot of people going in and out. It makes it a very dangerous place for cars. A lot more likelihood of accidents, and it makes it a terrible place for pedestrians. So it's interesting to me that San Diego is looking to embrace this idea of more urban villages where there can be greater opportunity for communities to build a sense of community and to build safer communities where you don't have cars blazing through your neighborhood at 35 to 45 miles an hour, and you create a more walkable, a more pedestrian friendly, a more people friendly environment. To me, this is intriguing, and I think this is all part of the transition of how San Diego is going to move from this sort of suburban sprawl city to a collection of these individual urban villages. I commented on one of my previous podcasts. My wife and I, we were in Toronto. We were up at the top of the CN Tower. If you ever been there, it's like the Space Needle in Seattle. And while we were up there, we saw the full sprawl of Toronto, it's a huge city. I mean, I kind of underestimated the size and breadth of the city of Toronto. But as I looked across the city from that high vantage point, I could see various urban villages, in some cases where there are high-rise buildings, where there is more dense housing in certain areas of the city. And San Diego has lacked a lot of that. I mean, there hasn't been very many, let's call them, more vertically oriented housing. We see some of it in the University Town Center area in the last 20 years. You'd obviously see a lot of that downtown, but a lot of that hasn't gone into many of the neighborhoods of San Diego, nor into the surrounding cities in the county. That's starting to happen now. As cities have to add more housing, there's not enough dirt. There's not enough places to build. So now rather than going horizontal to find open territory, because a lot of that is shrinking, they're now starting to go vertical. And that's part of what Mira Mesa is going to do. So this was approved unanimously by the San Diego City Council, because of course Mira Mesa is part of San Diego, and it's all part of this plan to make it this Mira Mesa more livable, have a way to solve the housing crisis. And they want to connect it. They want to connect the coaster and the trolley extension nearby. Which, if you're going to have that kind of mass transit, that makes sense that you want to integrate with it. But still, the environmentalists are not satisfied, of course, because they're not taking enough people off the roads. They like to see this to be even more aggressive than it is. Now, I'm of the opinion that as we get 10, 20, 30 years down the road, we're going to be living a far more clean lifestyle. We're going to have a lot less gasoline powered cars. We're going to have a lot more electric cars. And I think a lot of the mass transit is going to be greatly electrified. Talking previously about our earlier topic about battery storage, I think a lot of this can be powered by solar combined with battery to really drive a great deal of the economy and make things a lot cleaner. So when you look at a snapshot of today, where what percentage of the cars are EVs? Probably like 2 or 3%, maybe 4. As we get into the future, those numbers are only going to expand. Now, it is kind of interesting to me as well. Of course, there's people that are upset. They're upset about more density in Mira Mesa. And that's happening everywhere across our county. As more of these development projects going in, there are more locals that are upset because people don't like change. People don't like more people moving in, more traffic, more congestion, more stress on infrastructure. And we're seeing that in Mira Mesa. And we actually saw quite a bit of that. Remember when they built those high-rise apartment buildings right on the western edge of the 15 freeway north of Mira Mesa Boulevard? I know when those were built, there are a lot of people here in my hometown of Poway that were like, oh my gosh, what is that? I mean, that's not something we're used to seeing. It's funny too that here in my hometown of Poway, there, with all the development that's going on here locally, people are upset that we don't want to be like Mira Mesa. But the funny thing is that Mira Mesa is going to become something even different, and they're in a part of a transformation. Now, one other kind of historical footnote on this is that whole area, that Mira Mesa area, that area east of Del Mar, which is now Carmel Valley, Del Sur, Rancho Penasquitos, Forest Ranch, and even parts of Rancho Bernardo, that was never originally part of San Diego, part of the city of San Diego, but it was annexed in 1958. And I remember, well, I didn't remember this part of it, but in the 1970s, I know that they were building a lot of housing in Mira Mesa. It was a car-centric community. But I was a student at UCSD in the 1980s. And, when you lived on campus, it was all good. But then as we got older, we moved off campus. If you were fortunate, and especially if you were fortunate and had a little bit of money, you could move in one of the beach communities in Del Mar or Pacific Beach. But that was always difficult to pull off depending on, your family situation. So a lot of people moved inland. There were a lot of UCSD students in Claremont, in University City, and in some cases, Mira Mesa. So I remember when I was going to UCSD, and we would sometimes have friends that lived in Mira Mesa that would host parties at their house. And it seemed like we were driving to Yuma, Arizona, when you were leaving La Jolla to go to Mira Mesa back in the 1980s. I mean, back then, Mira Mesa Boulevard, if I recall, was just one lane in each direction. Sometimes we would take Miramar Road all the way out to Camino Ruiz and then hang a left and go north. And I remember there was a Noggles out there. Is that still there? And Noggles was kind of like one of the Mexican restaurants. It wasn't as good as Roberto's or Alberto's, but it was still a place that UCSD students sometimes would do late night food runs. But Mira Mesa has gone through so many transformations. Then I remember in the late 1980s, by this time I'm out of school, and we would drive out, I was in a softball league, and we used to have games that were at the Canyon Side Fields in Rancho Penasquitos. But in order to get there, we had to kind of squirrel around across Mira Mesa Boulevard and then kind of head north on Black Mountain. I remember that was just like it was like a war zone, the way all the hills and the mounds of dirt that they were using to carve up the area. And as a car, we were driving our little cars on this 2-lane windy road through this development area, and then sort of popped out in Penasquitos at the ball field so that we could play softball. But that was all part of that transformation of Mira Mesa. And since then, of course, they've built more, and now it's going to be even bigger. So imagine if we had a Space Needle in San Diego and we got up to look all across our entire county, and you project yourself out 20 or 30 years from now. It's very possible that we're going to see high rises, of course, in UTC, potentially high rises in Mira Mesa. We'll see high rises in downtown San Diego. We'll see high rises near the sports arena area. Now, that was just approved. We may see more high rises along the coast as the San Diego Coastal Commission relaxes rules. We may see high rises in Oceanside and other parts of the county. So what are your thoughts and comments on this? If you do, let me know. Type in your thoughts and comments on the live stream on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll see them here. We'll put them on the screen. We'll get you involved in the conversation.